Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now, the Friday Crime Report. This Friday, we've got a twofer for you. 2 crimes that occurred in the same place, though one of them being physical, the other one political. Last week, there was a mass shooting at a private school in Nashville. The killer was identified as a transgender named Audrey Hale, and while I'm sure the shooter is a topic of discussion for a number of reasons, in reality, this tragedy occurred for the same reason as Ethan Crumbley, Nicholas Cruz, the Uvalde mass shooter. It's because this country has established a permissive legal and social environment for certain people who want to use guns as their power. These mass killings are statements of extreme narcissism, not despair or rage. And they keep going to schools for the same reason Dylan Roof went to a church to commit his mass killing, or Peyton Gendron went to a grocery store for his. They look for soft targets. And this killer was under care for emotional issues, but that didn't stop the killer from getting guns anyway, just like Dylan Roof's drug arrest didn't stop him, and Ethan Crumbley being caught in class writing and drawing about a mass shooting wasn't enough for anyone to do anything about him either. Because immunity from law, from consequences, is what defines freedom in this society. And it's a core tenet of this country that black people are to be harassed, discriminated against, and punished simply for existing. But people like Ethan Crumbley and Audrey Hale, well, they're not supposed to have to worry about that. Though as a result of this racial privilege, it's the rest of the society who better worry. These mass killings are done as a form of statement. That's why practically all these animals write some sort of half-brained manifesto. At least that's what the white media calls them. That word manifesto implies some sort of keen intelligence behind these scribblings, that they've got some sort of deep thought processes when the opposite is true. They scratch out some self-serving gibberish about how brilliant they think they are and how the world owes them something they didn't get their respects or they're going to kill people, and everyone is forced to pay attention to their absurd delusions of persecution. But why not? This society has always prioritized the feelings of these suburban psychos over the facts. And since this society bends over backwards to let them know how special they are and to give them everything and to respond to their every whine and gripe, some of them feel they have to go overboard and do all kinds of extras to get people to pay them some level of attention. By the way, for those of you keeping score, this mass killing in Nashville happened on Monday the 27th. I only mention that because that same weekend in Chicago, 2 people were killed in the entire city. You get that? 6 people were killed in Nashville, 3 of them children. And in the city of Chicago, which Fox News and the rest of the white right-wing nut media says is the most dangerous city on earth, out of the millions of people who live there, over last Saturday and Sunday, only 2 of them were killed. That's 1/3 the number of people who died in Nashville in less than an hour in one day. That's why it's important not to let the white media conflate mass shootings with mass killings. Never ever let them get away with trying to equate them as being the same thing, because they're not. You make sure that you keep on point. It's about how many people died. Because while 12 people may have been shot over that same weekend in Chicago, all 12 of those people are alive. Of the 6 people who were shot in Nashville, none of them are alive. So more people died in Nashville last Monday than died in the entire city of Chicago that weekend. I guess that explains why Fox News didn't want to talk about it. But the only thing worse than the killing was the response by the Tennessee legislature, which seems to be the nation's largest cavern. The GOP has a supermajority in that legislature, which means they can pass any bill they want with no opposition. So that's what they've done. Last week, the Tennessee legislature's 2 youngest black representatives organized a protest inside the legislative chamber in order to prompt their Republican colleagues to enact legislation to restrict gun sales. Not ironically, the same good old boys in Tennessee who had no problem with the January 6th insurrection suddenly were appalled and aghast and said that what happened in the chamber last week was worse than the January 6th insurrection. Except, unlike January 6th, no one was killed at the Tennessee Capitol last week. Unlike January 6th, no one was even injured in Tennessee's Capitol last week. Unlike January 6th, there wasn't even any property damage at Tennessee's Capitol last week. But that's because, unlike on January 6th, the people who were chanting and standing in the legislative chamber weren't some white supremacist mob. Though that's not to say that there wasn't a white supremacist mob present, because there was. The white supremacist mob were the good old boys who control the Tennessee legislature. Yesterday, that racist mob voted to expel those 2 black state representatives. Now, there was a white woman who also took part in organizing the protest, and they introduced a measure to expel her, but of course they voted to let her remain. Gee, I wonder why. Many in the white left media have said the GOP made a huge mistake with this move. Potentially that is true. By doing something this extreme, they've given the Democrats something they could use to rally people behind. The question, though, is, are Democrats finally ready to become competitive in these state elections again? Will the Democrats put the money and resources into these legislative races, or will they stick to concentrating on only D.C. and continue dedicating all their time to finding ways to get more of that K Street cash? And while some people are saying that those 2 black state representatives were put on the political map this week, the reality is the Democratic Party leadership doesn't want to cultivate any rivals. That was a big part of the friction between Nancy Pelosi and Alexandria Cortez. The leaders of the Democratic Party see themselves as nothing more than a money-making operation. As they see it, their job is to protect their own congressional or Senate seat so they can keep the cash rolling in. They're too busy trying to keep their jobs to do their jobs. And the Democrats have already decided that Hakeem Jeffries is about as many high-profile black people as they can stand to look at. This expulsion of the black legislators happened 2 days after the 55th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. King, which happened in Memphis, Tennessee, by the way. A number of black people have said that there's a reason Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis. Because Tennessee is also the birthplace of the Ku Klux Klan. Pulaski, Tennessee is where that terrorist organization started. Now, before anyone asks, the expulsion of those 2 representatives is not permanent. They can run for office again, though given how the GOP has been weaponizing the law and Democrats have deliberately sat on their hands and let them, it would be no surprise if the fascist old party decided to change state law on that one. In Florida, they're talking about doing that so moron DeSantis can remain governor even while he runs for the presidency, something which is currently illegal under Florida law. Keep in mind, this is how fascist states and banana republics work. If something is legal on Monday, they declare it illegal on Tuesday, lock you up for it on Wednesday, shoot you on Thursday, and then declare it legal again on Friday. And the same way that these mass killers commit these atrocities as a way of showing their power, so these racist legislators pass unconstitutional laws that egregiously target black political figures for the same reason. They're demanding attention. And like the mass killers, we see them competing to see who can do the most outrageous violation of democratic norms, if not the law. These are the same people who pass laws to protect white children's feelings, or so they say, but they don't give a rip about protecting white children's lives. Where's Christopher Rufo at right now? Oh, he was all hot and bothered about books and about classroom curricula, because apparently that's harming white children. But white 9-year-olds having their heads blown off by military-grade weaponry, and he's nowhere to be seen. Gee, I wonder why. Where are all the right-wing think tank-funded operatives to come save white children's lives? Where are they at? I thought protecting white children was their top priority, or so they said. This is the ethos of white supremacy. They have no true principles. All they have is moral relativism and situational ethics. Right and wrong are just words to a white supremacist. The definition changes constantly depending on what they think will advantage them. That's why the definition of who classifies as white has changed so much over the centuries. The problem is these white supremacists think that prioritizing attacking black people over saving their own children's lives is them proving how much conviction they have for maintaining white supremacy, showing the price they're willing to pay, why they will gladly offer up the lives of their own babies as human sacrifices because that's how determined they are to maintain anti-black racism and the perceived benefits they think they get from it. Sure, most of those benefits are psychological and not tangible, and sure, it's insane to throw away your own child's life just to psychologically masturbate, but white supremacy is crazy, so it makes sense that those who practice it would be crazy as hell too. It would be a miracle if they weren't. They're not merely cutting off their noses to spite their faces, they are literally blowing off their children's faces to spite us. To them, this is some kind of perverted demonstration of their determination. This is what it looks like when racists are virtue signaling. They're showing everyone that they value guns over the lives of their own children. And why is that? What is it about guns in particular that these white supremacists have such a fetish for? Obviously, the gun represents and is used for something other than hunting or personal defense, as the white right likes to claim. To them, the gun doesn't represent freedom or any of their other lying claims. It represents power. As Dr. Francis Cress Welsing explained, even the shape of the gun has a phallic character to it. That's the principle they're trying to preserve. I would love to say that it's some dirty little secret, but there's nothing secret about it at all. The people propping up white supremacy know exactly what they're doing. They know the foundation of this country rests on anti-black racism, and that white privilege is how they intend to maintain it. The system of racial goodies, giveaways, and guarantees handed to those classified as white is the glue holding this entire racist scheme together. You got white liberals who are complicit with it, by the way. They don't want to admit it, but they don't have to. Their actions speak far louder than their words. I can't hear their denials because their actions are screaming what they truly believe. The sad reality is, you have these racist white supremacists who hate black people more than they love their own children. Teaching the racial history of this country has never harmed anyone. In fact, it's only benefited people. Even the white supremacists lying about it haven't had their feelings hurt. As we keep putting pressure on the enemy, many of them will openly confess to what we've said about them. They will admit that it's true. This isn't new, by the way. There's always been the Strom Thurmonds, the Barry Goldwaters, the Ronald Reagans, and the Richard Nixons, the Trent Lotts, Steve Scalises, Steve Kings, Marjorie Taylor Greens, etc. We allow the white media to focus too much on them and to present them as if they are just some loony fringe, when they're not. One of the biggest lies about white supremacy that the white media has created is the stereotype of the openly racial slurs spouting racist. Hollywood created a ridiculous stereotype of what an anti-black racist is. Someone who has racism Tourette's. They're just so filled with racism they spout the N-word spontaneously, uncontrollably. And they're just laughably racist. And that's the reason Hollywood created that archetype. The white media's version of a racist is a ridiculous caricature that we almost never see in reality. When you and I talk about racism, real racism, we're talking about not just displays of overt anti-black racism or someone spouting the N-word. We're talking about the denial of our basic human rights and basic dignity, which takes place in every arena of the society. Hollywood's version of a racist is an over-the-top cartoon, and they do that deliberately so that nobody in the audience gets uncomfortable. And by pushing this absurd distortion, what they've done is to actually try to reinvent, or as Christopher Rufo would put it, recodify what constitutes white racism. If you tell people that white racism is limited only to the KKK and a handful of good old boys in the South, then they won't feel uncomfortable about their own racism. If you tell the white bank loan officer in the audience, or the white merchant in the audience, or the white engineer or white teacher in the audience that racism is whenever they discriminate against black people for loans, or harass black customers in stores or on the street, or refuse to do business with black merchants, or when they single out black children for detention, suspension, or expulsion, when you point out that they engage in the same racism as the characters on a movie or TV screen that they watch, just that they do it as a joke, quote-unquote, or under the phony guise of protecting white children's feelings, then that's going to make a lot of them feel uncomfortable. So Hollywood offers them a lie because they're part of the propaganda arm of white supremacy, and by doing so they indoctrinate the country that a racist is some loud, screaming, slur-spouting caricature, when the reality is the racists are far more common and far more numerous than that. The other 95% of non-racism Tourette's racists don't get called out, they never get identified, and they never get punished either, which is the reason the racists in Tinseltown created their phony version of an anti-black racist, to cover up for the real anti-black racism. Put this false archetype out there, that way you can have all these racists who point and claim, I'm not a racist, why I've never burned a cross on someone's front lawn, and I haven't yelled nigger at some black person in a week. Hollywood wants to make all the racists in the audience feel better about themselves, as well as putting up this phony front that Tinseltown actually opposes racism. As Noam Chomsky said, it's the most sophisticated form of propaganda when something presents itself as opposition, when in reality it's actually support. And that's the dynamic at work here. Your white liberals will feign phony sympathy, but no matter what, they will constantly make excuses for not doing anything to punish the white supremacists. Hell, they don't even want to admit to it. Because the reality is, more of them than are willing to say it sympathize with the white supremacists and support their worldview. They want to preserve the status quo, which means making excuses for not punishing the white supremacists or ever doing something as basic as calling it what it is. Instead, they try to cover up their complicity with evil as being some kind of political chess move. We don't want to call all those racists in Middle America racist because that will only alienate them. Why, they'll retreat further into the corner of the white right, and then where will you be? Whenever you hear some member of the white left spouting some gibberish like that, just remember, they don't actually believe that these racists that we see on TV and see in these legislatures can actually be reached. They don't believe that. That's not the goal anyway. Look at all the so-called white liberals who you see who are lifelong friends with, in sexual relationships with, business arrangements with, and even married to mouth-frothing anti-black racists that we have to fight every day. And when you examine these people for only a few moments, you see that they are anti-black racists themselves. So that's what's been going on the last week. Tennessee has been a microcosm of this putrid dynamic. Gun legislation hasn't happened because neither party has an interest in it. The reality is that these mass killings and the anti-black racism we saw on display in the Tennessee legislature this week both come out of the exact same root for the exact same reasons. The white leftists are not going to admit that they don't really want to do anything about racism any more than the white right is going to admit that they don't care about their own children's lives. The support for white supremacy isn't done with thunderous applause. It's done with a wink and a nod. And that's this week's Friday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Kevin Buckner, Semesta Hobson, Sakina Collins, Yafet Jones, and Gladys Chatou. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.